Hey there, everybody. Marguerita here with the Authentic Podcast. I am super excited to be with you today, and I have the amazing Kylar Aaron with us today. So Kylar has a very interesting background. He grew up in a fundamental Christian homeschooling family and cult. After escaping at age 22 by joining the US Marines, he began his years of healing, which informed his career choices. He is passionate about inspiring and equipping others to live life fully alive, even when life has been brutal. He does this mainly through health transformation coaching and integrated massage therapy. So welcome, Kylar. It is wonderful to have you here. I'm really intrigued to have this conversation with you. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
So my first question is always, what does authenticity mean to you?
So to me, it means living in alignment with your soul purpose and what feels true to your spirit. And I think part of what I believe about authenticity is that each person has to kind of figure that out for themselves, because they could be loyal or aligned to some kind of code that they got from their family or religious circles or national allegiances or something like that, and feel like that's authentic, but it may not be. And so there's a bit of self exploration and self discovery along the journey, and what may feel aligned at one point in your life may not feel aligned later in your life. So authenticity is really being present with yourself and your journey of growth and expansion and healing, and living true from that place.
I love it. Okay, so now Hope for Living Fully Alive is your message to your audience. Now, when I spoke to you before we actually did the interview today, your past is incredibly interesting. Not one that, you would wish upon people, but it's just fascinating because it's so unusual. Most people would not have had the background or the environment that you grew up in. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, it's a little bit strange because I've done some healing and expanding and growth, and so most people have no idea or couldn't even guess that I had the growing up experience that I did. But I grew up in a fundamental Christian homeschooling family, and we joined a cult partway through that experience, and I didn't get away till I was 22. But and so obviously it shaped and formed every part of my reality and impacted all of my development and all of that. But it started out just as an angry, controlling home. And then my parents got more and more religious. My dad got more religious, and I think he had despised Christians earlier, previous to that, because he thought they were hypocrites. So then when he got saved, he decided he was going to do it right. And so, but that meant that he was doing all of it and controlling everything. And I've talked to a whole bunch of therapists. And so in hindsight, I realized I was developing complex PTSD during that time. And from the feedback I've gotten, he's possibly psychopathic, as well as a narcissist. And so there was this constant competition between him and us, and in particular him and me, where he didn't feel like he had value, or he was insecure unless he could prove to me that I was weak and useless and stupid and couldn't function without him. And so that was a constant daily thing. And my number one goal the whole 22 years was to get his approval. and I failed every day. And in hindsight, I realized that it was because it was rigged that way. Like he couldn't bear to approve of me. So that was my reality. But like what I started experiencing first was the physical symptoms, and because you can't live in that kind of stress without the body starting to shut down. So I remember from the time I was 3, knowing that I was experiencing some kind of strange fatigue. Like I didn't have the energy um, that my younger brother had, and later on younger siblings, and I got worn out faster. And in my teens, I would wake up in the morning and feel my energy tank like 50, 60%, and I could feel it dropping. And it wasn't like a soreness or something that I could just push through. It was like the energy to move, to be alive, to function was draining away throughout each day. And because my dad thought I was lazy, we never did look into it until after I went through Marine boot camp, and my mom, on a hunch, took me to her doctor, and we found out that I had hypothyroid and hypoadrenia. So my thyroid and adrenals were so burned out that they said I never should have physically been able to complete boot camp. They didn't know how I did it.
Wow. So
But I
you
think it
just
was
really pushed through, and that was probably as a result of your history with a
right.
psychopathic narcissistic father. Geez, what a fun combination. Um, so you just made yourself do it because obviously your father, it was obviously a very abusive upbringing.
hmm Yeah, so I was used to pushing myself beyond my limits. That was my reality. So it was a very self-destructive. In hindsight, I know that I was tearing my body apart every day just to function. And so I couldn't build muscle. That was the other piece of the prominent health symptoms I had. I was always skin and bone, and I wanted to build muscle. My younger brother got muscle automatically when he was 13, 14. Um, and and I was like, I want to do that too. And I thought I needed discipline. And so I would be very, very structured in my workouts and try to work out. And by a month and a half of doing the workouts every single time, I was weaker and smaller than I was to start with, and less
Gosh, it would be
energy.
incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, right. So I didn't have enough available energy or fuel to recover from the workout. So I was literally tearing my body to pieces
Wow.
along
And
the way.
interesting because you had that physical response in that environment. Were you the eldest?
hmm
So were you the one who copped the most of the abuse because
hmm
your siblings didn't have the same issues as you? They didn't develop the same physical response.
Correct. Yes, and everyone had or has had physical consequences of what they experienced, but mine was the most immediate and present. I think partly because of my personality, uh, I wanted to make my dad happy and get his approval and please him and everything, but he was committed to fighting with me as if we were in combat or something. So my mom has verified that she knows that I got it worst from my dad as well. But I was also very conscientiously trying to be a surrogate father to my younger siblings because I knew they weren't getting any encouragement. Um,
So were you trying to protect them? Were you, because you said this started at the age of, well, your symptoms started at the age of 3. So obviously the abuse started before that,
mhm.
because, well, the physical symptoms would have been a response to the psychological trauma. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And the stress, the hypervigilance I was experiencing. Yeah.
So were you trying to protect your younger siblings from the same kind of abuse?
Yes. So yeah. So I was emotionally managing everyone, trying to be the peacekeeper, trying to keep them from getting too loud or whatever, if dad was home or working in the back of the house where his office was. And so I was constantly monitoring everyone's behavior and noise level and my dad's attitude and when it was safer to let loose a little bit and when we had to really watch it. So yeah, it was a constant thing.
Wow, that's crazy. And this went on, like, what blew my mind when you told me earlier was that you didn't get out of there until you were 22. So this
Hmm.
went on for the first 22 years of your life. Were you in the cult until you were 22?
Yes. So we joined the cult when I was 12. We had just been homeschooled before that. And so there had been some interactions occasionally with other homeschool kids, some little like Saturday sports things or show and tells or things like that. But then after age 12, it got really strict and really shut down. Some people in that same program experienced a little more freedom. So because it was a homeschool program, it was kind of dependent on how the family ran things. So, but we happened to just get way more intense about everything around that same time. So, but part of it was part of the abuse, mental, spiritual abuse was the purity culture. I don't know if you're familiar with that and if you have a lot of that in Australia, but it's basically a movement to try to encourage people to keep themselves um, basically a virgin until they get married. And so, like, um, ultimate saving yourself for marriage type of thing. And my dad took that to a whole new level. So on my 12th birthday, I signed a contract with him and my pastor that I would not have sex before marriage, and got a ring, a purity ring, and then he wanted to make sure that I had support, which in his mind was that I would confess my sins to him every day. And
No.
in his thinking, because God, he believed that God worked through authority. God couldn't forgive me unless he forgave me first as my God given authority.
Whoa,
So every day,
that's narcissism, psychopathy to a whole new level. Like he
yeah,
was, wow.
yeah. So every day I was supposed to confess to him any wrong thoughts or actions,
I mean,
and
what
I
did
did
that
that.
do for your self confidence and your self worth? Like,
Yeah, he wasn't worried about that.
yeah, no, clearly, bloody hell. So, and how did that? Like, gosh, I just can't imagine such a controlled environment. So, I want to get to how that impacted you in a minute. But firstly, did it seem? Did you think this was normal? Like, did you think that this environment was a totally normal environment, even though you were being abused and all this other stuff?
So I didn't really. I tried to kind of figure that out in hindsight because I knew it wasn't normal, but I also we believed as a family that we were doing what God wanted and that everyone else was like sinning and being controlled by Satan and on the road to hell and just all this. So there was so much fear about anything on the outside. And I had so little interaction with any other adults in my life. And no one knew how extreme it was or how intense it was on the inside. And so even people that we had good relationships with or loving relationships with, they wouldn't have a clue about what was actually happening. And so they wouldn't even think to comment on it at all or even bring up things that were similar or anything. So, yeah, it was just kind of
It's
such a
all
weird,
behind closed doors kind of thing.
yeah, it was, yeah, we were in a little bubble, a little pocket that we could interact with the outside world, but nobody really knew what was going on. And I thought that, everything outside the home was really bad. And of course, I was very hopeful and had dreams and things I wanted to do with my life and all that. But when it finally really came down to it, like my dad, I found out that my dad believed that he was the one to interpret God's will for me. And so if he didn't have that vision for my life, then God didn't have that vision for my life, and I wasn't allowed to do it.
Wow. Okay. Now, fast forward to 22, and you
Mhm.
basically busted out.
Yep.
Firstly, why? What caused you? There was obviously some sort of a yearning or an internal desire to get away from the cult, because you would, even when you went into town, you had certain controls and stuff on you, didn't
Yep.
you?
Yep. So yeah, so kind of some of the practical things that led up to that moment was I had been wanting to figure out how I could make some money and eventually get married and have a family of my own. And I couldn't do that just working for my dad in his office for a few dollars a week. So yeah, so I used some money I'd always saved, and I worked for my dad over the years, and so I had quite a bit of money saved up, and I bought this very fancy, elaborate editing system, video editing. My dad did some video editing or video production, and I wanted to be able to edit his work and maybe work in tandem with him. So yeah, so the bummer with that whole situation was that I was wanting to expand, but I could only expand within whatever would be approved by him. So I spent most of my savings on this very fancy, very elaborate um, editing software, computer system, and I had a blast for about 3 months, working 10 hours a day, like figuring it out, studying it, look at the user's manual, and doing some editing for a seminar that he had recorded. And then all of a sudden, I'd used up all the memory, and he didn't want me to take any of the projects off the computer because he didn't understand technology, and he was so uninformed that he thought that we could lose it if I put it on a disk or a
Some sort
drive
of
or
hard
something
drive or
external. Yeah. So all of a sudden I went from working on this project. It was my own thing, like one of the first things that was really my own. And then all of a sudden I couldn't even use my computer for anything because I'd used up all the memory, and so it wouldn't function unless I took some stuff off.
mm,
So there was like this huge, I came to a screeching halt, and he was working a job and my younger brother was working a job together, and all of a sudden I couldn't do anything. And some of the things I'd been thinking about were like really loud in that moment. One of which was, I had this vision at the time of, getting to the end of my life, standing in front of God, and he's like, okay, I gave you all these gifts and interests and abilities. What'd you do with them? And I would, if life kept going the way it was, it would be like, well, I didn't do anything with them. And he'd ask why, and I'd say, well, because my dad wouldn't let me. And I realized that was probably the stupidest answer ever. Um, and I also had been studying the Bible, so it's kind of funny because I ended up from 15 to 22 was studying the Bible every day, memorized 22 books of the New Testament, um, was reading constantly, had this notebook where I was writing down all these verses that were in response to questions I put at the top of each page, trying to understand whether God was the same way as my dad was. And because if he was, I didn't think I could have anything to do with him. So studying the Bible actually helped me escape from him. And then later on, I left organized religion altogether because of the Bible as well. But but yeah, so in that moment, with the end of the video editing project, I was talking to my mom about the frustration that I was experiencing, and I'm not sure exactly what was happening for her in that moment, but she said, "Well, you've always been interested in the Marines. Maybe you could stop by when you take this piece of mail to town to the post office and talk with them."
wow. So she was opening a door for you.
Yeah, yep. And it was just
Wow.
that little comment that helped because, like I told you before, when I drove into town, at 22. It was like 2 weeks before my 22nd birthday. It was the first time in my life that I had ever driven anywhere without my dad's knowledge, permission, or prayer of protection. And he believed that if I ever did do that, then I was opening myself up. I was out from under his protection, which was God given, and I was opening myself up for Satan to destroy me in any way that he wanted to.
Wow, intense.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I can see why you didn't want to do that. So
Right.
your mum kind of opened this door for you. So obviously your mum had an understanding that this was not necessarily a healthy, nurturing environment for her children. And she
Right.
kind of had a moment of clarity and sanity and went, yeah, why don't you go and do this? And then maybe you can escape, son, sort of thing. So now in my mind, I'm thinking, wait a minute. So you've gone from narcissistic, psychopathic, super controlled environment, abusive, PTSD, and now you've joined the Marines. How did that work out?
Yeah. So not the best option, but I think it was the option that I had the most capacity to choose. So one aspect was that I
There
did
weren't
not
that many
have.
paths to freedom in your situation.
Right. So like I didn't even know that just anyone could sign up for community college or just go get a job or, get an apartment or whatever. Like I didn't know enough of how everything worked to even figure that out. But I knew that you could join the military and get training and get pay at the same time. So the military seemed like a great package deal for that. And then my dad had told me my entire life that I didn't have any discipline. Turns out I have more discipline than almost anyone I know. But so I only considered the Marines because I didn't feel like I would get enough discipline from any other branch. So in hindsight, it would have been way kinder to myself to like talk to the Air Force, get way more pay, better treatment, better medical care, all that stuff. But I didn't have that capacity to even think about that because I was so focused on uh, the discipline piece, but also I think like I had always failed his approval. And so I mistakenly thought that going through boot camp would be that stamp of approval that I was a man and had what it took. And that didn't work out because 13 weeks, 3 months of just the boot camp portion, um, I felt like I barely survived. And apparently, according to the doctors, I did. Um, and so I felt like I failed because I didn't conquer it. I just happened to not be dead by the end. And so it was very, very discouraging in the beginning. And it's taken me a lot of reframing through hindsight to understand the truth of the story that I was actually living.
So let's jump to that. So you weren't in the Marines that long. How long were you in the Marines for?
So yeah, I joined the reserves. So I had basically 6 months of training. So 3 months of boot camp, 3 weeks of combat training, and then a little over 2 months of Humvee and 7-ton driver training. And then came home and came back with the family for a little while before going to massage school and moving away. But yeah, it was 6 months of training, and then I crashed because my body was truly depleted. Taking my level of hypervigilance habits and then straight into all that crazy training, which it's designed in the Marines to replicate all the 9 aspects of war constantly. So it's nonstop. And then when I got home, I crashed and I was sleeping 12 to 14 hours a night. Felt like a zombie during the day, couldn't think, could hardly move. And it was months before I kind of got the energy enough to think, I got to get a job. I got to get going. I got to do something. So I started getting some
I
temp
bet your
jobs.
father was really kind to you during all that too.
Yeah, no. No.
Wow. Okay, so in the bio that you said that this kind of really directed all of this
Mhm,
because you've obviously been through so much trauma and
mhm,
abuse
mhm,
throughout your entire young life, and now through all of this, you come out. I mean, perfectly honest, you seemed like a really nice, sensitive, well balanced kind of guy who just wants to get along and help other people.
mhm,
So, how do you start this healing journey of healing all this trauma, particularly with such a lack of understanding of how the world really works? I mean, you've gone from the environment with your family and in the cult to the
mhm.
environment within the Marines, which is also not a normal environment. It's like
No.
not a normal 9 to 5 kind of job kind of thing happening there. So, how do you then start this healing journey, particularly you're so physically depleted?
Mhm. Yeah, so in hindsight, it was just amazing how I was guided through the processes of what happened. Because if I had known how damaged I was in the beginning and how much healing I would have to do in all the layers, I might have been just overwhelmed with grief and discouragement and a loss of hope and all of that. So it's amazing because I didn't even realize I had complex PTSD until about 4 years ago. And I've just been so focused on the next thing, getting better, recovering, overcoming, and then as a result, in recent years, kind of hit some burnout, um, understandably. But now I'm really able to accept myself and what I've experienced and what I've had to recover from a lot more. So the first thing that I ended up doing was applying to massage school after I recovered. And it's kind of funny because my dad started asking me to massage his feet when I was 3. So it's a strange thing that it was through him that I started doing that. And then even though I was a big hugger and he actually didn't like that part of me and discouraged me from hugging people because he didn't think it was appropriate, especially women. Because in his mind, you only do that if you want to feel them. So that's kind of a creepy insight into his mind. But um,
Yeah.
so but it was like, so I didn't get a lot of touch, in especially loving touch, at all growing up. But occasionally, because I was known for my massage skills, I would be encouraged or guided to give someone neck and shoulder massage growing up because I was really good at it and I could get rid of people's headaches and all this stuff. So that was something that was encouraged. My dad was a chiropractor, or my grandfather was a chiropractic doctor. So I was familiar with body work and I wanted to work with the body, but I did like the muscles more. And I would actually study the Myo Man, the Muscle Man in the encyclopedia, um, and kind of visualize the muscles under the skin when I was working on them.
Wow.
So yeah, so I got excited about going to massage school. That whole year of massage school was so powerful and healing. Actually being able to interact with other people of all ages. Some were just out of high school, some were in their 40s. And so all these different people were going through the same curriculum for the year. And I did so well in school. I was averaging over 100% because I did all the extra credit work. And,
Because
um,
you're so
and so,
undisciplined.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Terrible. So yeah, so then after that, I ended up through some crazy, amazing circumstances. The universe was guiding me again. I ended up working at a YMCA and getting some personal training credentials. And I'd been studying fitness on my own because I was trying to get fit all those years. And the modification I had to make for myself was to cut way back in volume and frequency from what would be normal. So I actually had to split my body into 14 different muscle groups. So it would take 2 weeks to get through the entire body and get back to a muscle group again. And that
Wow.
was
The
the
gift of
first
that
time
is
in my life.
if you're moving into personal training, the gift in that is the fact that you know so intricately the different parts of the body and how to work them and isolate them and all that kind of
Hmm.
stuff. That was it
Yep.
was almost like a part of the journey that you had to go through.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So I was able to start right away there, teaching like a strength, like a full body sculpt class, and some senior strength classes because I'd been doing my own workouts and studying this on my own for a really long time. And then I got certified through them and ended up getting my associate's degree in personal training and all that. And then I went into life coaching because I knew that there was more to positive life change, like people wanting to get fit. There was more to it than just adding some habits and getting rid of some habits, but it was actually like remaking your whole identity and becoming someone you've never been before. And so I was fascinated with that whole process. So I ended up going through life coach training and certification because I wanted to understand that process because I was going through it. Everything I was doing was helping me become someone I'd never been before and never believed I could be. And so for me to experience all these new versions of myself over and over again was just kind of disorienting every time, but I was used to being outside of my comfort zone. So, yeah.
So as I said, you really seem like you're very much in touch with your emotional side, and that's not that common for
Hmm.
guys.
Hmm.
Um, but to have gone through what you've gone through and be so mentally and emotionally grounded and well-rounded and seemingly just like you don't seem to have um, you don't display any ongoing mental illness or issues from the contact that I've had with you.
Hmm.
So, what kind of things did you do? What kind of processes and techniques did you use to help to heal those abused parts of you?
Hmm. So one of the things that when I read "The Body Keeps the Score" by Bessel van de Kolk. And at the time of the book's writing, he was the foremost expert on PTSD. And there's a whole bunch of amazing people out there. So I don't know if that's still the case, but he was saying that he had never seen anything more effective for healing complex trauma than yoga. And so it was what he was highlighting with that was that you are breathing, you're getting out of your head and into your body, and my version of that was the more mindful strength training that I ended up doing that finally worked. Slowing down, working one muscle group at a time, really being in my body, um, feeling the muscle, reaching fatigue with the muscle, keeping every other part of my body in a state of peace and calm. So the somatic aspect of getting back in my body over and over again and for however long my workout was every day was really powerful, I think, for that process. And then I applied those steps to other aspects of my life and just allowed myself to take baby steps in habit change and thought change and all of that. So it's been a journey, and I've it's interesting because I haven't done like one type of therapy for the whole duration, but I've allowed myself to sample all kinds for seasons. And so I have worked with all different kinds of therapists and coaches and energy workers and all these people over the years. And I think one of the biggest damaging aspects of what I experienced was the erosion of my trust in myself.
Mm.
And so for me to retain autonomy and ownership over my own healing journey, and work with somebody as long as it felt like I wanted to work with them, and then switching and experimenting with someone else has really been a powerful part of that. And so I've tried a whole bunch of different things and learned a whole bunch and expanded a whole bunch. So strangely, I don't know if you're familiar with the sport of pickleball.
I have heard a lot. It's not big here in Australia, but I know that I have friends in the United States that love pickup.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like a smaller, faster version of doubles tennis.
Uh,
Um, but it's so I've played a little soccer. So like when I started working at the YMCA, I signed up for some indoor soccer, and I'd always wanted to play soccer on a team, never got to. And then I started learning some volleyball at the same time. But pickleball has been the sport which I learned a little bit later, and I've been playing now for 8, almost 9 years. That is like the sport that I've been able to experience the most improvement in and focus. And it's actually become a very strange laboratory for my managing of my psychological triggers and the trauma triggers, because there's a lot of intense, aggressive people that get attracted to it, and because
oh,
of the way the sport's designed, well, there's all kinds of people. It's a really wonderful sport, and it's got a whole range of playability. So like almost anyone can play because of it's a small court. You're playing with a wiffle ball and paddle. So like even people that can't walk very well, kind of don't have great balance or high eye hand coordination, they can play pickleball. But the better you get, the more you start playing with the really competitive, really aggressive players who have played a lot of other sports and transition into it and play very well. So I'm with no sports background. I'm playing against a lot of people that have some major sports background and have all their emotional patterns and habits from that. So I can run into some aggressive players, and then also just because my dad was always looking out for a lack of perfection and anything he could criticize, when I'm in these high intensity games and can't play the way I want to for a few rallies in a row or a whole game or a couple of games, my whole nervous system starts freaking out in preparation for the anger and the punishment that it thinks is coming and the rejection. And so it's like the one space in my life that the trauma gets triggered the most, strangely. And so it's really prompting me to dig in and figure out, how do I have compassion on myself in those moments, work on the somatic stuff, not shame myself for what happens when my whole body starts freaking out and I have this internal panic attack. And so, yeah, it's wild, but yeah, I've experienced so much healing in every other area of my life. And that's the one that's like still the deepest little trigger.
so you've obviously had this really intense journey. How has that shaped what you do, how you work with people, and the kind of journey that you take people on when they come to you?
So yeah, so when I'm working with transformation coaching clients or massage clients, the one thing that I want them to feel the most from me is the unconditional positive regard um, that Carl Jung talks about as a part of his philosophy of psychology. Um, and I know how damaging it was for me to be coerced into believing that I didn't have what it took. And so I want to come with that strong emoting that I know my client has what it takes. And as a life coach, my main job is to listen and ask pointed questions and kind of draw out their story from them and their beliefs from them and kind of highlight and reflect it back in a way that they see what they're thinking and what they're believing, and help them articulate their own struggle,
Mm.
and then help them articulate their own solution. And so and I want to infuse in them the hope that they can still live life fully alive no matter what's happened to them, or how broken they feel, or how their dreams have been dashed, or whatever. That's my passion and intention, to help them understand that they've got what it takes. They're here for a purpose, even if that purpose is just relishing life. They get to focus on the things that they love and that make them feel good.
Wow, I love that. So I know that your website is kylarwellness.com. I'll put the link in the description below for people who want to go and connect with you. And you also have a Facebook page that is Kylar Wellness. So, and do you think one of my favorite sayings is that you are not broken and you do not need to be fixed? How do you, being through what you've been through, how do you resonate with that? What I mean by that is that our soul is always perfect, whole, and complete. We are always perfect, whole, and complete. No matter what trauma or abuse that you've been through, you are still perfect, whole, and complete. There may be parts of you that need healing
Mm-hmm.
to experience that sense of wholeness again, that sense of okayness.
Mm-hmm.
But so how do you resonate with that?
Yeah, no, I like that. And obviously there are moments when I feel, man, I am broken. And I think that that's, normal and okay to feel. But I always love looking at nature for examples of this. Because like if you look at a tree that's been hit by lightning, or a bunch of branches broken in a storm, or um, part of it's broken off or whatever, um, it's still a magnificent being. And the way the trees recover and grow back, and parts come back to life, and the way they manage their wounds is like a really beautiful thing to witness. And so you don't, I don't go through the woods and see something like that and just think, wow, how tragic. But it's like, that's really impressive, like the power of overcoming something that was really brutal to deal with. And I like to visualize the invisible aspects of complex trauma, the way it affects the nervous system and the body, and the mind and the emotions, with thinking of like someone who is an amputee or in a wreck, has to have part or all their leg removed, or another limb, and they have to deal with um, healing and adapting, and then learning how to use a prosthetic and
And
all
grief
of
and
that.
loss.
Yeah, exactly. And it's all part of their beautiful story, and it doesn't take away from what a beautiful and perfect and amazing human they are. But they do, depending on the severity of the situation, they do have to face the reality of that trauma every day. And there are aspects of their reality that are never the same again. And I feel like we've been slow as humanity to understand that the same can be true for the invisible aspects of trauma, where I know that I'm going to have to be managing some of these reactions every day. And I know that I'll get better and better and better at that, in those unique situations that I get triggered. But, but I'm still like, I feel like I know that I've signed up for this, and my soul knew that I could handle it. And the thing that I love the most about every brutal thing I've been through is that if someone else comes and they hear my story and they've gone through something brutal, they know that I know what they're talking about, and they don't even have to fully explain themselves. They don't have to figure out how to articulate it because I know. And so it's like we have a whole private language that we get to speak. We don't have to do a lot of translating because we've been through that. And I can have tons of compassion on them when they are not yet in a place where they have the capacity to have compassion on themselves.
That's so beautiful. So, what if somebody's been through something like traumatic, brutal, abusive? What guidance, what suggestions, how would you encourage them to really start to heal those parts of themselves that still feel fragmented or fractured, to start to bring themselves back into that feeling of wholeness?
Yeah, I think part of what causes us to feel fractured and really broken is that those parts are not witnessed. And some of the trauma that we experience comes from the traumatic incident, and part of the trauma comes from the invalidation from others. I remember hearing a statistic that if someone's in a car accident and it's really bad and they have to get pulled out of their car and they're just shaken, if someone is there to hold them for a couple of minutes, and then they go through all the questioning from the police and like what happened, and reporting, the insurance reporting and all the stuff that has to happen after an incident like that. If someone has held them or given them a hug right after it happens, they almost never develop PTSD.
Is
But
that
if no
right?
one
Really?
gives them a hug or holds them afterward, they almost always develop PTSD.
How extraordinary. So that's that healing touch, like
Yep.
touch for
Yep.
health, you know?
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. So even if there's no one else, we still have to acknowledge ourselves.
Yeah.
And so like part of my healing journey has been to kind of step into the parent role to my younger self and reparent myself by really feeling all the feelings of a certain incident, and then stepping in as my adult self and comforting myself and offering compassion. And so sometimes like just doing that is like the first step, because if someone has kind of isolated as a result of their trauma, they don't know who to trust yet, and they're kind of all over the place, and it's really, really challenging to know how to regulate yourself when you start to share those things that you've never shared. And so even doing it yourself first, and journaling and all of that will help you to regulate enough that maybe you can find someone, make a wise choice, someone who can handle hearing your story and sharing it with them.
Wow, that's so extraordinary. Well, it's been just fascinating talking to you today, Kyla. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us, because obviously that's a big deal to be able to share something like that, going through what you've been through, and to give other people hope that no matter what they've been through, what abuse or trauma they've experienced, that they can heal and there is a healing path.
Mm-hmm.
So if they go to kylarwellness.com, they can sort of get in touch with you there and find out more about what you do, how you do it, how you can perhaps help them to heal those parts of themselves, that trauma, with a great deal of empathy and compassion. And I really do admire you and how you did have the discipline and the courage and the fortitude and the tenacity to really take that journey, because so many people would have just sort of given up and been bitter and all the rest of it. But you just seem like the most beautiful guy, and with so much depth and compassion. And just before we wrap it up today, I just want to come back to your analogy with nature. And I always find it so extraordinary that things like you'll walk through a forest and there'll be a tree that's fallen over, but its roots are still in the ground. And the tree has started growing back out of the trunk. It's like there is an entire tree coming out of the trunk. Or, you chop a tree down and you come back 2 weeks later and it's there's sprouts coming out. It's trying to grow again. It's kind of like it's so resilient and so tenacious. It will just do what it's there to do. That's its blueprint. It is there to grow. It is there to be a tree, and it will just focus on, okay, you cut me down, I'm going to find another way to be a tree. So, and we all have that blueprint within us just to be these incredible human beings, and we are so much stronger and capable of so much more than we realize. So thank you so much for coming and sharing your story with us today. Is there anything that you would like to share with the audience before we wrap it up for today?
I think just that if you've struggled with feeling self-confidence and feeling powerful, just resolve to keep trusting yourself over and over and over again. And if you want help with like the more healthful fitness side of things, I did write a book. It's on Amazon, Intuitive Fitness for Empaths. And so I share some of my story there and some of the practical fitness and nutrition things that have really helped.
I love that. Beautiful. Intuitive Fitness for Empaths.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant. Okay. By Kylar Aaron. Fantastic. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you again, Kylar. It has been an honor and a pleasure and fascinating to hear your story. And I'm just, as I said, I so admire how you've come through that and come out the other side, and that you're now helping others to take their own healing journey. That's just amazing. So bless you for being such a wonderful soul.
Thank you. It's been an honor to be here.
So thank you, everybody, for listening to the Authentic Podcast. And I will see you in another episode very soon. See you, everybody.